Okay, thanks very much. Welcome everyone to this morning's committee meeting of the Planning Committee of Falkirk Council. I can ask if there are any apologies.
Convener, we have apologies submitted by Councillor Nicholl. Thank you.
Okay, any other apologies? Any declarations of interest by any of the members? Any declaration of interest? No? No? The minutes of the meeting of the Planning Committee, which is on pages 31, sorry, 31, yeah. Page 4 to page 12, 13. Any issues arising with the minutes?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
Item 5 is the part change of use of the rectory, including meeting areas and studio and study, to form a dwelling house at the rectory, 55 Cass Lane, Falkirk, for Falkirk Christ Church. Councillor Reid, Councillor Reid, you asked to address the committee. I'm happy for that to happen. The floor's for your own.
Yes, thank you very much, Convener, for allowing me to speak and for accommodating Mr. Ogilvie as well. I think in the absence of site meetings, this is quite a good idea. Thank you. I'll deal with the broad brush stuff. I think Mr. Ogilvie will no doubt go into the more detailed presentation. First of all, this building, as we all know, has been there since, well, over 150 years almost now, and was originally built as a rectory alone, with the church standing separately but adjacent. There was a small church hall which was demolished in, I think, around about 1990, and at that point the lower floor of the rectory was converted into a church hall, etc. The current application is again to change the layout of the rectory to allow a dwelling house to be accommodated. Although I would point out that there's always been a dwelling house there of some kind, but sometimes inhabiting the whole building. And that's where the rector lived, obviously. Miss Jory, as always, has done a very thorough job in dealing with this one. If I could refer to paragraph 1.4, Chairman, I can be if I could get up on my iPad first. I think it basically says that the applicants have indicated they intend to retain ownership of the whole building. So the house, if and when completed, will not be owned by the occupants. Ms. Charlie goes on to say quite correctly, this cannot be controlled through the planning process, but I'm equally sure that there's a way of preventing this action through legal means. If the council lawyers and the church lawyers got together, I think an undertaking could be carried out regarding the future use of the building. I think we then have to concentrate on the paragraphs, sub-A, 7A paragraphs. Ms. Charlie quite correctly goes through all the various planning aspects. 7A 11. It's to do with the acoustics, which of course feature quite prominently in this application. And it then goes on in 12 to expand on that. It talks about noise from a live band in the hall. I think this would be most unusual in the case of this church. Choir practice, no, that's hardly disturbing. Again, it goes on to say that the recommended soundproofing would not be enforceable through the planning process. But I think once again, that the paragraph goes on to say compliance with building regulations could be enforced through the serving of a notice in what I consider the unlikely event of excess noise coming from the hall. 7A14 refers to patrons leaving at night, smoking outside, talking outside, slamming doors, opening and closing doors, resulting in a residential amenity issue which could cause noise complaints. I think again this suggests a use of the hall which is not in fact correct. I don't think it's that type of hall, and I don't think the future use of the hall would be of the nature leading to lack of amenity. The parking, I think, has been covered. I would conclude briefly, Provost, Convener. I know I have a limited time, by acknowledging that this is an abnormal application, unusual, exceptional, and I think it should be treated as such. There are policies, but every policy has its exceptions, as we know through life, and I think this application should be granted, taking into account that some of the misgivings can be resolved by other means. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks very much for that. Mr. Ogilvie,
Yes,
you have the floor.
thank you very much, Convener. In fact, Mr. Reid has covered some of the ground that I wanted to cover. There's no problem with that. I'm very grateful to him for it. I still will go through what I wanted to say. So I forgive me if there's a little bit of duplication, but I think there are some additional points I want to make. It's unfortunate that the recommendation of the planning officers is that our application should be rejected. Unfortunate, because I believe that this may be a result of the misunderstanding which has arisen, because COVID restrictions put them into the invidious position of making a recommendation without really visiting the property. They raise a number of points in detail which they judge to contribute to their recommendation. I don't intend to take up your time in enumerating these, although I'm happy to do so if you wish. Suffice it to say that I don't see that any of these need to become obstacles to our application. There is a solution to all of them. And there are one or two cases where I think that, again, there's a misunderstanding about what our intentions were. For example, and I'd like to raise the question of acoustics too, as Mr. Reid did. To be clear, the hall is a church hall. Its use is for activities which support our role in the community, and that's an important thing to us. It's never used for amplified music or live bands, and we'd have no objection to a condition to prevent the use of that use if that was appropriate. However, more importantly, I would like to address 4 fundamental issues. Again, to some extent already covered by Mr. Reid. First of all, the planner seems to be confused by the word rectory. Agenda item 5 uses it to describe the hall. A rectory is a house, and this one's been used, as Mr. Reid said, for over 150 years. The hall is indeed a hall. In 1986, 2 of the ground floor rooms of the rectory were converted to be used as a hall. The application does not create a new house or subdivide anything. It only includes improvement of the existing subdivision, which was carried out at that time with consents for the use of the part of the rectory as a church hall. The applicant is not seeking consent to subdivide the building. The rectory is within use class 9 and the hall within use class 10. Second point, we no longer require the residential accommodation for our own use. The hall and the adjacent building, for a church building that is, for repairs to which the council have recently generously provided a grant, are all essential and together integral parts of the facilities on which the work in the community of our church depends. Spent at least £20,000 in 2020 in upgrading the accommodation within the rectory, and we'll be spending another 5,000 or so, and we're not sure of the amount yet, on improving the acoustics as we propose. This will allow us to use perfectly good vacant living space, and the income will contribute to the cost of the maintenance of this fine Victorian building. Its use will also allow Falkirk Council to receive council tax, which would not be the case were it to remain empty. Indeed, if it were to remain empty, it would surely be in stark contrast to the important work of the council's empty homes officer. Thirdly, the planning officer uses policy HCO2 as the regulation to be applied. It is specifically intended to apply to windfall housing, referring to sites that become available for appropriate housing developments which have not been identified in the development plan. In this case, policy HCO2 should not apply. The rectory, as I've said, is a house, was built as a house and has consent to be used as such. It could be occupied as a house tomorrow without any challenge. It's not on brownfield or greenfield land because it's on land used for housing. It's not a site, but is a house. This is not, therefore, housing development on a site, as defined in policy HCO2. Finally, the argument for the proposal requiring planning consent seems to hang on the change in use of the house from by a rector or other preacher associated with the congregation to for a tenant who has no formal role or association with the church. This transfer of use is, in fact, a common occurrence and is, for example, directly comparable to a Church of Scotland manse being sold or leased independently. Planning permission would not, we understand, be required in these circumstances. In this instance, as with some other manses, the church hall is attached, but this arrangement has the necessary consents already. So the conclusion of the planning officer's recommendation refers to the provision that any material consideration could outweigh non-compliance with the local development plan and Scottish planning policy. These four fundamental issues which I've outlined provide, in my mind, ample evidence of material considerations which should surely outweigh any perceived non-compliance. So I would be very grateful for if the council could support us in continuation of our work in the community by granting planning permission in this case. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ogilvie. Can I open it to, Jim, is it procedural? Because we still hear the officers on this. Can you hear?
Convener, did you want me to just go through the report and give a summary of what it refers to?
Convener, apologies, I think you may be muted at the moment, but it is available to members of the committee should they wish to do so, to put questions to Mr. Ogilvie, who made the deputation.
Yeah, you're correct. Any questions at this point? Councillor Bryce?
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Mr. Ogilvie.
Good morning.
It was interesting listening to what you're talking about. Am I right in saying that the rectory itself is actually, although I'm assuming that it's connected to the building, but it's not, but it's actually separate from the building? Would that be correct?
Separate from the church?
From the main hall, yes.
No, it's the hall, which we have been using since 1986, is simply two rooms which were converted from the original rectory. So all of the original rectory remains for residential accommodation, but these two rooms plus a converted kitchen and ante rooms that go with it, are used as a hall.
Okay, but you've got, I'm assuming there is and I'm sorry if I wasn't clear, I'm assuming there's another hall that you'll be using if this was to go ahead. Is this disconnect?
No,
Is there direct access between the two? It'd be
No, there
handy if we actually seen the drawing. It might be, if Catherine's got that, it would be handy if we've seen that, but that's...
It wouldn't be another hall. We would continue to use these two downstairs rooms in the main rectory building as a hall, as they're used now. And that's why the acoustic issue is an important issue, and we're addressing that to make sure that the dividing walls between the hall, the rooms that are used for a hall, and for the rest of the accommodation is properly separated for sound.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? No questions for Mr. Ogilvie? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ogilvie, for your contribution. We'll hear from the officer, who is Catherine Chorley.
Thank you, convener. I'll just do a very brief summary of what's proposed. The original application was submitted for the part change of use of the building to form a 3-bed house. So the applicant is looking for planning permission to subdivide the building and create an additional dwelling. That's what's been applied for, and that's what the plans show. The application would result in a self-contained 3-bed dwelling and the retention of 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a kitchenette, a meeting hall and a meeting room as a separate unit. As we've discussed with Councillor Reid, the agent has indicated that they don't intend to sell the 2 units, but this is not something that we can control through the planning process. There's really no suitable mechanism in planning for us to control that in this particular application. I think you can see that the internal consultation responses are included at section 4. Roads Development Unit find the proposals acceptable and adequate parking can be provided by condition, but Environmental Protection have raised concerns in relation to the potential noise impact of the scheme, and that's covered in more detail at 7A.10 in the report. The new dwelling would be located adjacent to and above higher intensity uses, specifically the church meeting hall, and there's limited control over how this space could be used. The application has been accompanied by the acoustic assessment, which you've already heard about, and that has certain soundproofing recommendations in it. That's based on the requirements of the Building Standards Technical Handbook, and these requirements are not designed to attenuate noise associated with anything louder than normal domestic activity. So we're talking about attenuating noise from people speaking or moving through rooms, watching TV, that kind of thing. There's no control over anything else like the maintenance of windows, hours of use of the meeting hall, the opening and closing of doors, that kind of thing. So the application has been assessed against the policies in the Local Development Plan and Scottish Planning Policy. There are concerns in relation to privacy, provision of private garden space for the dwelling, and size and noise associated with the existing use. We consider that the development would not provide a satisfactory living environment for the occupants of the new dwelling, and it's therefore recommended that committee refuses planning permission for the reasons set out in section 9 of the report. I think it might be useful, Bernard, if you could show the proposed floor plans so we can just look at the relationship between the meeting hall and the other rooms.
Yes, Bernard, have the plans there?
Thanks, Bernard. I think you can see there the difference in the colours shows the difference between the 2 units. So the yellow floor plan refers to what would be retained of the rectory. So you've got a kitchen, a meeting room and the meeting hall at ground floor level. And above that, you've got 2 bedrooms, bathroom and kitchenette. The new dwelling would be the green floor plan, which would include a sitting room at ground floor level which would be next door to the meeting hall. And then above the meeting hall, you would have the rest of the accommodation associated with the new dwelling. So that would be a number of bedrooms and a kitchen diner.
May I ask a question, please, convener?
I'm sorry, Mr. Ogilvie, but unfortunately it's not allowed as per
Okay,
legislation.
thank you.
But anyone else? Yes, sorry, you're sitting in the shade. And you're muted. Councillor McCluskey.
Aye, right. Thanks, convener, for letting me in. I'm happy with this proposal. Clearly, what happens is we've got many flats above pubs. When people move into a pub, they know what above a pub, they know where noise would be, and that's just a fact of life. I don't think there'll be any noise here at all. But as I say, there's plenty of examples where, as I say, people are next to a noisy facility. We've got environmental health here, and we've been out on many occasions, and we turn around and say it could be a car wash, for example, and they say there could be a noise after a car wash is granted, but it's entirely for an enforcement for environmental health to go out and tell them to turn the guns down and come up with things. That's what happens there, because they've got to be a proven problem before they can deal with it. If there's no problem, what's the issue? And until there was evidence, then it can't be addressed. We've also got the situation here saying there may be a noise if we open windows. Noise. We've always had noise problems in a whole host of pubs and houses and situations within Falkirk. And the issue is you can only be a noise if the window's closed. You know, you can't enforce somebody because a window was open. But all it would take is an advisory here to say that the windows would remain closed while if a function was on. That's surely all it needs done to keep the windows closed. But I've never heard the likes in my life. And some of the points been made here, to be honest, convener, in a planning application, because these things are for if there was a problem. It's if we could, you know what I mean. That's what this report seems to read like. As far as the garden ground, that is an issue, but we've said this. It's no different from planning applications that come in and say that, you know, they should have disabled access if it was say you know, once again, a pub, a shop, or something else. And we talk about historical. This is a historical building here, you know, that was been here for a long time, been in use by the church, and I don't see a problem for allowing this. It is quite unique. It's supporting community functions at a time when people need that sort of encouragement to worship and see a bit light at the end of the tunnel here after COVID. So I'm quite happy that to move grant in this application, convener. I've not got an issue because I don't see any evidence to say that there would be. What all I see here is there could be, and coulds is not proof. We've got an excellent environment team there who can deal with an issue if it did arise, and I don't think it would. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Councillor McCluskey. Anyone else? Councillor Martha and Councillor Blackwood. Do you have your hand up, Laura?
I didn't know. I think it was Councillor Bowes that had his hand up, actually. But...
Right, no, definitely didn't confuse the two yous. The Councillor Bowes and then...
If Councillor Blackwood's had his hand up, I'm quite happy to let Jim go first.
Okay.
I don't remember my hand up, but I'm happy to support and second Councillor McCluskey's proposal.
Okay, good. Councillor Bowes?
Yeah, it's on this, the soundproofing part itself, and 7A12 talks about that. Is there a level of soundproofing, and this I suppose goes to Catherine, that we would ask if we were to allow this to go forward? Is there a condition we can put on a level of soundproofing that we can put in there? I mean, I see you're talking about in here about bands and things like that being there and being 100 to 110 dB rating. The Church have always said that's not likely to happen. So is there a realistic level that we can get so that we're working with the Church to come up with a reasonable solution?
Anyone from planning or environmental health here to comment?
I don't know whether David or Crawford from Environmental Protection might be able to step in on this one.
Okay, gentlemen, who's going to be the...
That would be me probably first initially, but we've responded on this one, and thank you very much, Councillor McCluskey, for your kind words about our effectiveness in dealing with noise complaints. But our role on this one really is to head off that kind of issue. Our consultation at this stage is to say, is there a potential in future? And I think Catherine quite eloquently sets that out in terms of it's what the future use of the property is. I do appreciate Mr. Ogilvie saying that currently you're not having live bands in that room, but you would have planning permission to have that as a whole, and you would have a domestic property above it. So I think what we're looking at is the potential development and future use. You've got two separate activities that don't coexist well. And Crawford, I think, in his response has said that he doesn't see how a domestic property could be fully protected from the noise from the adjoining church building, which I would quite support, and I think Catherine sets that out quite well. But it does leave us in the position that Mr. Ogilvie is seeking to develop it in this way based on current uses, but we do have to envisage the fact that we could have or we could generate further problems for ourselves, and that's our role in this, is to try and preempt that, let's say.
Sorry, convener, can I come back?
Yes.
Sorry, David. I'd particularly asked a question if there was a level of soundproofing that would be required, and the reason for that is, and Mr. McCluskey and I occasionally disagree in things, but we're trying to do an awful lot of stuff at the moment, High Street with flats and things like that coming back into play. These might end up with pubs underneath them, so I'm assuming that there's going to be a standard soundproofing level would be required there. Is there a level that we can maybe work with the Church to get to? And I was thinking the DB rating, I'm just wondering if, because that obviously could then be put in as a condition, which maybe the Church could work with.
Yeah, I understand that point. It's not something that I have a particular knowledge of. There's, a higher grade of acoustic protection that we could seek to achieve. I can maybe bring Crawford in that as well. Crawford deals with most of our noise complaints and dealt with this original planning application. But it may be a building standards question rather than an environmental health question. We tend to respond to the complaints on these kind of things rather, and we don't necessarily have the building acoustics expertise that perhaps our colleagues in building standards have. But Crawford, do you have anything else that you would wish to add on that?
Yeah, just to try and answer Councillor Bow's question there, that there isn't really any specific standard for that, because and what Catherine's pointed out in our report there is that the noise assessment that's been undertaken is in relation to building acoustics for a domestic setting. There isn't anything in any sort of guidelines or documents for use of this type. It would really, because the situation could be so different, different. It depends on what type of noise that they would be making in there, and that's something that we wouldn't be able to equate. The only way, real means of doing that for things like this, or for say, for example, like a pub or something, we would have to request like a noise impact assessment that would be undertaken, where they would then demonstrate the type of noise that they were going to be likely to generate, and then whether that would have an impact on the adjacent property. So generally, it could be like, there's maybe possible amenity issues and things with the comings and goings with the operations as well, which that could be difficult to equate any noise assessment or levels on that. So to answer the question, really, there is not a specific noise level we could probably request for that. It would really need to depend on what it would really have to be some like a noise assessment and acoustic consultant.
Okay, Councillor Bowes, you content with that particular answer?
Yeah, it does give me more questions as ever, but no, I'm content with the answer.
Okay, the Councillor Kerr?
Thanks, Convener. Convener, I know every application is taken on its own merit, but we just passed an old church last committee meeting. Nobody mentioned acoustics, nobody mentioned nothing for the neighbours next door to them. I support Councillor McCluckie and Councillor Bissett and approving this application, Convener. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Kerr. Anyone else? Councillor Bissett?
Thanks, Convener. I just wanted to ask, has there been any historical issues with the church hall? You know, has there been any reports in the past that there's been noise or anything like that?
Kathleen, or it'd be more so that'd be the Environment Health.
I don't think there's not any record or of any recollection of that in recent years anyway. In the last 10 years, I would say. I'm not sure about further from that on or back than that, but certainly not in the last 10 years.
Anyone else? Mr. Martin?
Thanks, Convener. I just wanted to, I think that what's clear here, and from reading the recommendations of what the officers have put forward, I think in some ways it is understandable and fair enough in the way that they have tried to anticipate the potential problems. And as environmental health officers were saying, in some ways what we're being asked to do is to approve the suitability of this particular application, and we all hear all the time from the general public, how on earth did that ever get planning permission? We hear that line all the time, and that's the the anticipation of problems after the event. I can understand why the officers have put down the concerns that they've got based on the application. I think our job clearly is to weigh up the considerations in this specific case. And although I do think technically it's true, at the moment, there's no history as we've heard of any particular concerns. But in granting the application, it is not to say that if that's the classification that's granted, that the change of ownership could completely change the character of both what happens in the hall and no association with the dwelling house. And that's something I think that we have to bear in mind. And I think officers are right to bring that to attention based on what the policies are. I don't have a problem with that in the report. And I think it was important that we did assess that. On balance, given all our other priorities and what our as a planning committee, what's in our local development plan and what our overriding policies are, I think there is a case here that we do look to the situation on the ground and the likelihood of the type of dwelling that's going to be, and on that basis, I think I'm comfortable with supporting a grant in the application. But I think it has to be on the basis that we are satisfied as a committee that there are material considerations that override what's in the recommendation. I think the recommendations are valid in and of themselves, and officers have been correct to state it like that. But I think that the particular circumstances, as has been laid out by the applicant and by Councillor Reid, do override that, and I think I'm fairly comfortable to support that. But on that basis, rather than that the recommendations are not valid, I think that they would have been. So I just wanted to make that point clear in terms of my support for what's been put forward.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Murtagh? Sorry, Councillor
Thank you.
Hugh.
Thanks, convener. It's really just a comment. I'm sitting here and I'm listening and I'm thinking, you know, a 3-bedroomed house will encourage possibly a family, and it could actually, the noise pollution could go the opposite way. You could be sitting having a meeting in your hall and you could have children thumping about up the stairs. So I take it when if we grant this application and you'll be looking for a tenant at some point, then the tenant will be well aware, as will the church, be well aware of the agreement. And I think at that point, these type of things could be ironed out with your tenants agreement. But I would not at this point view refusing the application due to a noise, a possible noise pollution, although along with Councillor Murtagh, I do accept that the planning department need to highlight that. That's fine, thanks.
Okay, anyone else? Councillor Hughes?
Yes, thank you, convener. The thought just crossed my mind, although we're talking about the soundproofing internally, I was wondering, just a thought, in terms of the windows. Obviously, the windows have to be of a sufficient soundproofing standard, because what I was thinking was that obviously you will have traffic noise, and I was wondering if what type of windows are currently in the building, or the proposed alterations, and what standard of windows may or may not be put in the future.
Okay, before I ask planning officer to answer that one, can I add a similar question to it, and that's in terms of the carbon footprint of the property, and you know, what action will be taken to ensure that the footprint is smaller and we meet our targets with regards to construction. Can you pick that one up along with the question from Councillor Hughes?
Convener, I believe that the window session case, I don't have everything quality, and in section 7A.19 of the report, I cover the low and zero carbon policy. Because this is a conversion, it would be zero carbon technology.
But we would be advising in the strongest possible terms the contractor to ensure that that there are changes that will benefit the general environment. So I thought that would have gone without saying. Any comment?
I said that regulations.
Yeah, I was looking around the collection of individuals here to see if there's anyone from Building Standards, but there isn't. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Councillor McCluckie.
Convener, I do know that carbon footprint's a very important issue, but the worst buildings in the Holy Falkirk are our brand new secondary schools for emissions. Surely we're not going to take the planning consent for them, you know, no any secondary schools. I do know there's going to be issues with it. We're waiting on the Scottish Government making decisions on how we're going to reduce the carbon footprint and grants, and looking at how private owners and that can take things forward, as well as councils and that. But at the present moment in time, there is no funding there, and there is no legal reason at the moment. The officer has explained that as this is only a change of use kind of thing, that it's not needed.
Okay, I mean, what's needed and what's desirable could be two different things, or they could be the same. And I think that there's something to be gained from always having an environmental head on in relation to the works of this committee. But is anyone else at this point? Okay, well, I'm going to have the final word on this, which doesn't happen very often. The this building is only a matter of a few yards, either in the Falkirk North Ward or just out of the Falkirk North Ward, depends on which set of boundaries we look at. But it's close enough to the area that I've represented for over 30 years, for me to know the premises, know the clientele of the premise. And I've never received a problem, never received any complaints. I've never received bad word for the church itself. So I'm sure that in the event of any problems that this application will bring, because it looks as if we have a consensus within the committee, then I'm quite sure that the church would be more than happy to work with our officers in terms of concluding the business to everyone's satisfaction. And these areas of concern that the department have can be addressed. So I'm happy to support the consensus that's built up between the members on this one anyway. So we have a motion that's been moved and seconded, and with no one that's otherwise minded. So can we take it that that's we're approving the principle of the grant. Of course, there will be conditions, and I think seeing Henderson sort of waving, there will be conditions. Ian, do you want to come in and give us an idea of what these conditions would be?
Thank you, convener. In fact, I was just hoping you might allow me an opportunity to sum up, as I understand the motion and the reasons that the mover has given for granting permission. I've noted that the committee, having considered the detail of the report and all the information before it today, is satisfied with the nature and location of the proposal and the benefits it would bring, the amenity, privacy, and noise impacts associated with the development. You're satisfied with them, and that the development would be compatible with existing uses. As you note, convener, there would normally be a delegation to the Acting Director of Development Services in relation to conditions. I don't know, Bernard or Catherine, if you have any brief summary of what nature of conditions you might anticipate.
Thank you, Ian. Convener, in the circumstances and given the comments during debate, I would suggest that if members are minded to grant permission, it'd be subject to a condition that the development's carried out in accordance with the approved plans.
Is that not the recommendation within the report?
The recommendation in the report is to refuse planning permission, convener.
Yes, but in terms of the conditions, you're refusing them for reasons that have been outlined in the report. To then carry these forward to a meeting between yourselves and the applicant may not be what members are voting for today.
Sorry, convener, I may be misunderstood. I wasn't. What I was suggesting is if members are minded to grant permission, that there's only the one standard condition that I would recommend be imposed, and that's the standard condition that development's carried out in accordance with the approved plans.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I was looking at the referral to our own plans, the local plans, for example, rather than the plans of the contractor or the developer. So it would be the developer as plans that would be under scrutiny in that case.
That's right. Yes, it's the plans that have been submitted that you are approving.
Yeah,
the condition just reaffirms that.
That's fine. I'm with you now. Thank you. Any? Right. Ian, you satisfied with that?
Thank you. On the basis that the mover of the motion and the seconder appear to have nodded with what I had noted, that's very helpful, convener. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And
Convener, I did suggest that an advisory be put on that when someone's live on in the hall that the windows are closed. You know, but it's only an advisory for the applicant. You know, could include that.
Yeah, I think that obviously the plans that we looked at, the plans that are submitted by the contractor and the developer, would look at that issue. Am I correct, Bernard?
If the committee feels they would like an advisory, we can certainly add something as an advisory note, as Councillor McCluckie suggests.
Fair enough.
It's not something that would be the council could enforce. It would be purely an advisory note.
Okay, you can take that, Councillor McCluckie. Thanks very much. Okay, thanks very much, colleagues, for your participation in that one. Thanks, Mr. Ogilvie.
Thank you very much for allowing my attendance.
Thank you, convener. Thank you.
Thanks. I was looking to see if you were still here, but
I'll leave the business.
okay, thanks very much. Moving on to item 6. Is a conversion of flatted conversion of 2 flatted dwellings to form dwelling house at 57 to 59 Ammon Street, Greensmouth, for Mr. David Balfour. Its members are aware that any plan application that is submitted by a councillor must come to committee. So this is it. So can bring in the planning officer for this particular report.
Thanks, convener. The application is as you've described. It's a fairly straightforward application, I'd suggest. It's a proposal to convert 2 flats into 1 house. The proposal does require planning permission. It complies with the development plan. There's no objections from neighbours or community council or consultees. As the convener mentioned, the reason it's been brought to committee is solely because it's an application that's been submitted by Councillor Balfour, and therefore under standing orders, it's required to bring the recommendation to committee. As you'll see from the report, the application is recommended for approval. There's nothing much really for myself to add on that. It's a fairly simple application. Thank you, convener.
Can we accept the application?
I was going to propose it, convener.
Okay, you propose Councillor Kerr. Anyone else?
Happy to second.
Councillor Murtagh.
Agreed.
That's my cue, sorry.
No problem with this, convener. This is obviously just a change inside as well, so nothing to do with the carbon footprint here either.
We accept the report then.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Right, thank you very much.